In this video, we're going to do a little deep dive comparison into how Kegan's Stage 5, Spiral Dynamics Yellow or Clare Graves' GT system, and ego development theory's autonomous stage, how they seem to be different and how they seem to be similar, at least according to me, and what we might be able to make out of that approximately about human beings and their psychology. This is Jürgen Rasmussen. Welcome to the Provocative Hypnosis vlog. So in the last episode, we talked about Kegan's 4.5 stage, that transition between the self-authoring, which is stage 4 in Kegan's system, and self-transforming mind, which would be Kegan's stage 5. Now, this form of mind is very rare. In fact, our culture does not really at all support it. So, according to Kegan and other developmentalists, perhaps 5 to 6% of the population in the United States, at least, has, or the Western world, I think that is, sorry, has some operation from that 4.5 stage, and only about 1% operates at that self transforming mind. Jennifer Garvey Berger, one of Kegan's students and an author of developmental psychology books, uses that number, approximately 1%. I've also heard from other sources that no one has really fully scored at Robert Kegan's stage 5 when assessed through that subject-object interview. And when they eventually reach that 4.5 stage or even 5 stage, it's never until middle age. So in any case, quite rare. I should say that Clare Graves did work with university students, and he found perhaps 5% at the time who were at that yellow stage or GT system. And this was amongst university studies many decades ago. So that's kind of interesting. Both Susanne Greuter and Clare Graves would find more people at the yellow or autonomous stage, respectively, than Kegan would at the 5th stage and at a way younger age. So that's something interesting to look at. Now, if we start with Kegan again, remember that the self-authoring mind, stage 4, he or she feels like a complete independent autonomous self that may enter into relationships or partnerships with other independent autonomous selves. So there's this sense that I am who I am, and that's kind of a kind of permanent autonomous self that's stable over time, which is me, and in which authority lies. When people begin to move towards that 5th system, that very self system begins to be taken as object. So instead of a self, you have the process of selfing. That this is an activity, something that's fluid and dynamic and which shifts and is constructed and reconstructed over time, and there's more access to how that process of selfing is being constructed and reconstructed over time. So now, for example, in a relationship, instead of there being two complete autonomous selves who enter a relationship, it's more viewed as two people pretending to be complete, meaning taking their self concept, which per definition is partial and limited, and confusing that with the wholeness of what they are. So you begin to see that your conception of self is convenient fiction. It's a thought construct. It's not who or what you are. And that's something of a game changer. Kegan talks about problems solving you, meaning that if there's some long standing conflict in a relationship or in the world, then there's this possibility that you may be over identifying with one part of a polarity and that the other person seems to be holding the other part of the polarity, and that the conflict is an opportunity for you to recover more of your own complexity by finding internally what the other person seems to be holding for you. And even being able to see more of what you have claimed for yourself in the other person. So, in that sense, you could say that this person likely has more capacity to own more of their own shadow elements. Not that Kegan necessarily uses that term. There's less of a tendency to confuse the map with the territory. There's less of an absolutistic mindset. In stage four, one is kind of fused with the values generator, the decision maker, one's own institution, so to speak. Now that is being taken as object, and authenticity is more seen to be often us confusing who we are with a particular ideology. So stage four individuals very often are are quite ideological. Stage five or approaching stage five individuals can be harder to break, to kind of pin down. They're less ideological. There's more nuance, there's more subtlety, there's more ambiguity, there's more shades of gray, there's less either or dichotomous thinking, and again, more shades of gray, more ease of paradox. One difference between that kind of four and a half stage, which would be a kind of very deconstructive, you kind of deconstruct perhaps reason and agency and inner authority, is that at that stage five, you have more of a capacity to kind of reconstruct those things, but through the lens of seeing more of the subjectivity behind the alleged objectivity. There might again be more of an emphasis on reason and evidence and these sorts of things, but more of an appreciation of contextual factors and also the subjectivity that lies behind all of this stuff. If conflict is an opportunity to recover more of our own complexity, and we are able to take more of our own self system as object, then people who operate here tend to be more interested in information and feedback that shakes up or disconfirms their own meaning making, because they're aware that they have a way of knowing and that way of knowing is limited. This gives hope in the criminal justice system and law enforcement and stuff like that, that we might become less prone to confirmation bias. Because if you look at earlier stages of development, the human brain and mind seems to be a confirmation bias machine pretty much. We believe and we tend to seek out to confirm our own beliefs and our own ways of knowing. And there's at least some hope that when more people begin to make meaning in this way, that we become more wary of confirmation bias, more interested in challenging our own beliefs and challenging our very own ways of knowing. Now, regarding identity, when someone perhaps has more of the fourth system going on than the fifth system, we might be looking for information to strengthen and reconstruct and improve our sense of self. There's still this idea of working on ourselves or improving our self system. If someone truly entered that fifth stage, which is very rare, there would probably be no longer that desire to work on a self system or to improve one's self, meaning no longer that desire to identify with any form of mind at all, but to kind of have the self be the context in which construction and reconstruction emerges out of, meaning no longer an identification with form at all. That would likely be a fully fledged fifth system. Now, how does this map onto um, Graves, for example? Graves' GT system or spiral dynamics yellow. Well, this is kind of interesting. The two key markers for GT or yellow is that compulsiveness drops off and fear tends to disappear, relatively speaking. At least the psychological fears, right? So compulsiveness drops off and fears, relatively speaking, the psychological ones have a tendency to drop off. There is no longer the compulsion to achieve or to perform or to get things. Um, as Graves used to say, there is ambition, but there is no longer ambitiousness. As Christopher Cowan used to emphasize in his seminars, the person who operates from that more orange system might have more of a I need to know or I must perform or I must achieve, versus the person who operates at the yellow or GT system is more like I'd like to perform or I'd like to achieve, but I don't really have to. So that drivenness tends to be gone. There seems to be more of an appreciation for simplicity and minimalism, and you're way less likely to see this person posturing or having status symbols or being concerned with those sorts of things. There's often more of an emphasis on just functional fits and resonance, finding ways of expressing what's inside of you in a way that resonates with who you naturally are and which may be of benefit to other people as well. But there's no longer that driven, competitive status mindset. Um, so, and this would make sense too in terms of having some more map territory distinctions. That absolutism in thinking no longer being there. Graves' GT system is a self-express system. It's a express self, but not at the expense of other system. And it's a kind of systems way of thinking. What's happening to this system that I am a part of? They're likely to be more aware of their own limitations and to be more self-reflective. So they tend to only do the stuff that they want to do and would probably not accept a job that they weren't competent or skilled to do. And have less of a, that orange system often has more of a conceited, you know, desire to change the world, or if only I could be president in a sense, or if only if I could, sit behind the joysticks and manipulate things, I could change and improve the world. The person who operates from yellow probably wouldn't want that. They'd be too aware of their own limitations to think that they should run a society or anything like that. But there's little emphasis here on owning one's own shadow, as it is in Kegan's system. If we compare this to the autonomous stage in ego development theory, here you have the relativism gets relativized in service of higher values and principles. So you have a person who's usually pretty principled and who knows what his or her values are, and the main drivers here being self-actualization and self-fulfillment and self-determination, but very often in a way that also works alongside other people. You have a person who's committed to generativity, committed to creating a meaningful life for him or herself, and to have good quality relationships. Instead of the kind of achiever stage, which is often concerned perhaps more with money and career success and achieving goals, this is more of a being authentic and living your values and living from a principled place type orientation. And something else that kind of sets apart this autonomous stage from previous stages in ego development is that they are more able to, just like with Kegan's 4.5 and fifth stage, more able to own more of their own shadow material. So they can be more tolerant of others and more flexible. What you'll also often see here is principled anger. These folks have a tendency to stand up for what they think is right. Again, very principled, very values based. So higher principles rules relativism. They see a lot of the subjectivity behind things, but instead of that, nothing's true, nothing's more better or worse than anything else. They have a tendency to think that you can have approximate truth, and that higher development is better because you have a more adequate map of things, if not a complete map of things. The key driver here seems to be to become the most that you can be. This seems to be in contrast with Graves' GT or Spiral Dynamics Yellow, which is more like, yeah, I don't really care if I accomplish anything. It's good if I do, but I don't really care. Where that compulsiveness and strive drive seems to be off. So, anyways, I hope you found this interesting. In the next episode, we will look at Spiral Dynamics Turquoise and the construct aware or magician stage and unitive or ironist stages in ego development. See you then.